Well, welcome back to this special episode of the Dental Guys at the Academy of Osseointegration 2024 meeting right here in Charlotte. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm John, the Dental Guy, and this has been an amazing time. And I think if you've been listening to the releases that we've been putting out here as you're listening to this maybe a couple months down the road post the meeting, I can tell you that you missed out on a lot of great stuff here at the Academy of Osseointegration.
But you can get ready for next year.
But that's right, next year.
Seattle, Washington, we haven't talked a lot about that yet, but because that's to come. But if you miss this meeting, one of the reasons why we're doing this is so that you guys can have access to some of the experts that have been here at the Academy, some that have been coming for a very, very long time, and we've been coming for a long time, and we really believe in the Academy, and I'm super excited about this conversation.
Well, Seattle too. I'll just say it's one of my favorite places that we've had the AO meeting in the past because we get different folks from overseas maybe come a little bit more in that area. I love that. We have a lot of just a diversity that we get to see there that sometimes is just different depending on where you have it in the country.
Well, I'm a geek, so
and it's just a cool city to be in because it's the coffee scene.
There's the coffee scene. There's Microsoft. There's Google. I remember when I went with my wife, I was like, "We're going to Seattle for my 10-year wedding anniversary." Yep. And but what's interesting is the Academy, is choosing cities that have something special to offer.
That's right.
And it's been great here in Charlotte, so you have missed out if you're listening.
That's right. But we have a special guest with us today that, we've been bringing a lot of high-level people to you. And this is the gentleman that's been involved in the Academy for a long time in various capacities. And so, Dr. David Cochran, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I think the first thing to start with is that this was a big year for you at the AO. And you were the receiver of the Branemark Award. And that is a huge accomplishment. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about what does that mean to you?
The Branemark Award really is one of the most significant awards, I think, in implant dentistry. And if you look at the names of the people who have received this award, it's really the who's who in implant dentistry across the world. I mean, the people that have received this are heroes, in the implant world. And so to be selected and be included in that group of people just floors me that happened. And I've been next year will be 35 years. I've been in academic dentistry and in implants, and I met Dr. Branemark, had a chance to get to know him a little bit, and it's such an honor. He changed the dental profession forever, right? I mean, how often does that happen, that the profession actually changes? So, I mean, what he did was just remarkable, and to be have an honor in his name. It just stuns me,
Yeah. Well,
so
I feel like
incredible.
You've always been focused on taking basic science and trying to translate that over into clinical reality. And I think that is something that Branemark was also good at and had the ability to inspire people at the same time. So I think it is quite an honor. And so we're glad to have you. And I think one of the things that I want to maybe just kind of dive right into is speaking of basic science, because we have been following along with some of the things in the last, say 5 years or so, especially that you've been working on. And there's a potential game changer coming down the pipeline. And I want you to talk a little bit about tetranite, about mineral organic resorbable bone adhesive. Did I get that right?
Oh, good for you.
Morba. We'll just say Morba to keep it easier. But tell us about what is that, and what are we talking about? Why are we excited about that?
Well, I don't know if you know much of the history of that, but the gentleman that really started the company used to work for an orthopedic company, and they developed it's phosphoserine and tetracalcium phosphate together. And he was working for a big orthopedic company, and I guess the orthopedic company decided to go in a different direction. So he broke away and got licensed to that patent, and then developed his own company, and started trying to get this product to go to market. fortunately, a number of years ago, got involved with the FDA, and I was on the dental advisory panel, so I got to know a little bit about how things work through the FDA. And so I've been involved in several products that we've taken to the market. BMP2 is another example. And so I presented with a fellow, Bob Marks, down in Florida, and we got approval for the BMP and the collagen sponge, and they use that in extraction sockets. I think it's an incredible growth factor. So this guy took this company and started developing this product, and it's adhesive to bone, but it's also adhesive to titanium. Which is really something we've never had before, and I'm incredibly excited about tetranite product. And so what they asked me to do in San Antonio was to do a large animal study to see if the material really worked well to stabilize dental implants. So we designed an experiment where we would create defects in these canines, and so there was no real support to put the implant in. And then we would inject the tetranite, let it set for just a few seconds, and then we put in the implant, and then it would stabilize, it would solidify, and it would hold that implant where it was. And what we found out was that if you give it about 30 seconds or so, put your implant in, and then wait about 3 minutes, you could torque that implant almost to 35 Newton centimeters immediately like that.
We're talking about taking spinners.
Yes.
And immediately seeing.
It sounds like even more than a spinner.
Literally
putting a wobbly
into,
implant.
It's totally wobbly. Like,
Wait a minute.
No support at all.
This is like wood shop, but not. And that's what I love about. There's the technical side of things. There's the mechanical side of things, and the things that get me excited is the biological. What is going on here? Kind of tell us a little bit about what's going on here and how is this working?
Yeah, well, it's even more phenomenal than just its adhesive qualities, because anytime you're going to try to grow bone, which is what we want around implants, obviously, is whatever substance you put in, you have to maintain the structural integrity of that material so it keeps the implant where it is while it's being replaced. It has to, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And any material we're going to use has got to not only do its role when you first put it in, but over time it's got to be replaced by the body and still provide that stabilization function.
Let alone be accepted from the beginning, right?
Yeah, to be
it has to be biologically acceptable, right?
Yes, and so that's what we sort of showed in that animal study. It was incredible.
What kind of success were you seeing?
Oh, it was 100% in the animal, 100%.
100%.
And the histological features, the bone grew right into this material. The material doesn't just fall apart before the bone gets in, so the stability is maintained, and that, to me, was the amazing part.
So wait a minute now.
So the volume of this defect was maintained,
but
and replaced by bone.
Are you saying that the osseointegration curve that we see, the dip, was that eliminated?
I'm glad you know about that. Totally eliminated, and that's what we're talking about. I think there's no question that the future for us in implants and dentistry is when a patient comes in, you're going to pull out the tooth, you're going to stick the implant in, glue it in, and forget about it. And you'll come back, restore it.
And then you're just waiting for bone to form, but you're not concerned about the dip. Immediate loading could be a thing potentially for every patient.
Yep. Yeah, it's possible. I'm a little conservative, so I'm gonna let the material kind of get replaced a little bit with bone first. But you're spot on.
But not concerned with that. And so when you say 100% success,
well, in the animals,
in the animal model,
yeah,
and then And that was, I'm guessing, a big deal study that took a lot of time and effort to do, right?
Those animal studies take about 3 years from start to finish. And
Wow.
by the time you get to histology, we did removal torque values on this thing. We checked it every way to Sunday to make us to evaluate this stuff, because it was for the FDA. I mean, they want every little detail
Before you go to
done.
human trials, you've got to
prove
Which
it.
we're not used to in the implant industry, right? Many times it's a like kind device. So we just say, well, it's like the others, and we don't necessarily have to do
It's
this.
called a 510K
510K,
process,
yeah.
and it gets us in trouble sometimes. But I've done a lot of animal studies prior, and some implant companies insist on showing that it works first. Other companies don't do that in implant dentistry, but that's been my whole career, is working in animals first and then translating it. And in fact, that's where we started with implant surfaces research that I've been doing and others. But we were able to show that if you roughen the surface on the implant, we could get bone to grow in much faster, and we cut the healing time in half. Because when machined implants first came on the market, you remember it was 6 to 9 months before you could restore it, right? And so we found that the bone-to-implant contact was much greater with a roughened surface, and the removal torque values were much higher. So we started restoring these implants in 6 weeks. So we did a formal clinical trial and showed that that worked. And then we did what we called a field trial, where we went out to 900 clinicians, and they each did about 10 patients each. And we showed that anybody could do this. After 6 weeks, if you use that implant, you could do reverse torque at 35 Newton centimeters. So things to encourage bone formation.
Yes, but you've been used to that type of study. Again, there's not everybody's doing it, but you know how that works. So then the next step from that is to translate that to the human model.
Yes.
So we have read a couple of these studies now. Again, Pico's just published, and we've seen your publication. So how much data do we have? And what is it looking like so far in the human model?
Well, we took the results from the animals, because that animal data blew me away.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Absolutely. I've never seen something get replaced with bone so well and yet maintain that perfect integration over that healing period. So we took, and we did the first 10 patients. Picos did 10 patients, and we did 10 patients in San Antonio. And we learned a huge lesson that you guys know this already, but when you take out a tooth, it turns out the extraction socket resorbs rapidly, a large percent within the first 6 months. And what we kind of didn't realize was how rapid that turnover was. So in our first patients, I was assuming, it's just like a dog. I did them all in the dogs. Let's stick it in this patient. So we did, and we put the tetranite all the way to the top. Well, the top part of the extraction socket is rapid turnover. So the tetranite, remember, is adhesive. So it adhered to the implant, and it adhered to the bone. Well, it turns out at the top 25-30% of the extraction socket, that bone resorbs so quickly that all of a sudden that tetranite is hanging off the surface of the implant like a chunk of cement that got down
an irritant.
An irritant. So I can't remember if it was 1 or 3 months, we got infections in all those things. And we realized, or what became very obvious, we don't want it all the way to the top. We want it in the bottom half of the socket, so you get that stabilization. You put that implant exactly where you want it, stabilize it, and then you let a blood clot, or you could bone graft it probably, put in. But we underestimated the bone turnover rate of an extraction socket. So the company changed the formulation to make it a little bit more porous. And then the other thing we learned is to keep it about halfway up the socket, and then you're golden.
Still had the same stability.
It was
just a matter of knowing that you were going to have this change quicker.
So the company's going through that iterations. I think you guys had Michael Norton on it. He's on the scientific advisory board of the company, like I am, and we are having to go back now with this new formulation and not putting it up so high.
Mm-hmm.
And then Michael's getting very successful at that. Paul Fugazzato's is now doing 5 or 10 patients for the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
And then
short implants.
That's Paul's
wheelhouse.
Paul's wheelhouse is anything.
Yeah. yes, he's the man.
He's a crazy guy. But it's been very successful. But the FDA says, okay, you guys can do more patients, but you got to do them in segments. So he's getting to do like 5 patients, and then he's going to do 5 more. And as we build the success rate, then we're going to start doing more patients, and I think other people will. I'm excited about this. I really think it's the next greatest thing.
Yeah.
And like I say, I think in the future, everybody that gets an extraction, if they want an implant, they're going to get it right there.
So what's amazing to me, though, and Norton kind of touched on this, is that
you're already there.
Dentistry is leading the way in what could be a much bigger impact product than dentistry. I mean, you start to talk about this, we're in a clean contaminated field.
Yeah.
And so some of the things you're talking about as far as bone resorption and infection, I imagine that orthopedics is going to really, I mean, this would change everything.
Well, I can tell you the company is already thinking about that, and they've got human clinical trials going now on cranial defects. So they're now beginning to use it in cranial defects, and I'm sure they're going to be successful. There's no question. And they're also doing orthopedic trials as well. So they're all over this because it's an amazing substance.
This could also change. We're talking about, and Dr. Norton talked a little bit about this. We're talking about it just the adhesive qualities to bone and titanium, but even maybe what this could lead us to is a totally different implant design.
Mm-hmm.
Something that maybe could go back to look at like some of the advantages of smooth implants, of things that are easily treated.
Smaller
implants.
That, less need for augmentation potentially in some cases.
We see so many different screw types across, and it's mainly so that we can get stability, these designs of these threads.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see it go back to machined implants because it's like teeth. I mean, you guys deal with teeth. You have to acid etch a little bit, so you get a little tooth, what they call tooth, and it gives the adhesive something to really kind of hook into, if you will. And so I think that's going to always probably be there. But I don't think the design of the implant makes any difference if it's a good adhesive and it works well to stabilize. I don't think the shape means as much as it used to. That's what it comes down to.
Right? Wow, yeah, the surface technology, like you say, may still matter, but maybe that just
tapered versus
but all of these shapes and sizes,
all these things.
That would be to say a major disruption is a very big understatement.
Yeah.
And so give us an idea, since you've been involved with how these trials work and how the process works. What's the timeline for something like this? And obviously, there's not a defined.
How does the FDA work in a situation
how long is
like
this process before we know that this is something that could be ready for prime time?
Well, when you start dealing with the FDA, you have to determine whether your product is a device or it's a drug. And they look at those two drastically different. You're talking about the 510K process. An implant that's a little different but not quite the same is okay if it's a device. If it's a little got some drug characteristics, then you have to satisfy other criteria. I worked with one product. It was skin that you grew in a petri dish, and then we used it as a graft material. Well, it turns out the FDA said, that's both a device and a drug, and so you have to satisfy both things. So if we're talking purely device, it's a faster timeline. And you still have to do all the trials and still do all the work. Phase 1, you do a few patients, but you're looking at safety and efficacy. And if that works out, not too much efficacy, but mostly safety. And if that's, as long as it's safe in the patients and you do it just in a few patients, then you go to a phase 2 trial, which is you expand the population you're putting it in, because eventually everybody's so different. As human beings, we're all so different. You've got to put in a lot of people before you can say that's safe for the population, for the world. So you go to a phase 2, and then phase 3, a phase 3 trial with a device, a lot more people, but longer term, and they're really looking at the efficacy at that point. So if you get through phase 3, then you can get on the market if everything looks really good. But you're still looking at a number of years for that to happen. But and of course, the FDA makes or breaks a lot of companies, and I've done several products where the company spent millions of dollars on Medtronics. I worked with them for a number of years on FGF, fibroblast growth factor. We did some fantastic clinical trials with that, but it got to where they wanted to have like a dose response in the patients, and they wanted us to do the whole dose response before we started actually expanding the population. And it got to where it was too expensive. And so the FDA really makes or breaks you depending on how, I don't want to say picky, but what the hoops are you have to jump through.
Yeah.
But with a device, I think tetranite, I think you're looking at a couple of years, but to get the data. I mean, they're pushing as hard as they can, but and they've got lots of data, and they're working with the FDA. I would hope in 2 years that this would be on the market in our hands.
Really?
I hope so.
That's faster than I thought.
Yeah, and do you look at I know different regulatory agencies in different parts of the world are different. And I know sometimes you see products come on the market first in Europe, for instance. Is that a strategy that sometimes companies look at as well?
You're a smart guy.
Well, I've just seen that.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and that's what, usually it's a little bit easier in the European countries to get on the market. And so, and that's a little bit against our FDA. But people go to Europe first, get data over there quicker, and get on the market faster, and then they'll come back and work in the U.S.
And that helps to fund the rest of the project, I would think, too.
Well, it does, but it puts the U.S. investigator a little bit behind the 8 ball because we're always having to wait for it to be approved first, and then they get to us, and that's a little frustrating as a researcher.
Of course, of course. So this is still, again, there's some hoops that have to be gone through,
big hoops.
Of course.
Still big hoops. Yeah.
But having the background of, it seems to me, like I say, in our dental world, we don't have as many companies that are doing the studies that you're talking about. I do find that's interesting, is maybe I take that one step back to that. And you mentioned that, a lot of this is 510K that we do in
devices
in our implant world. And yet there are some companies that are doing true, basic science research, animal model science research. But that's pretty rare. Is that correct?
Well, in my career over this last 4 decades I've been working in it, there used to be a lot more companies that would go through the process because it wasn't so onerous to get on the market. But now the FDA really clamps down sometimes, and the companies are driven off. Like I say, Medtronic spent millions for FGF, and then the FDA came back and said, well, we need this. And Medtronic says, well, we can't do that and get a product at the end of the day that's going to pay for everything we've invested. Right. So they just dropped out. They just, after spending about $10 million, they just said it's not worth it to us. And Sunstar, worked with Sunstar Corporation, and all these companies that were doing these different things. If the FDA is making it so difficult, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it takes so much money to develop a product. We used to have more going on, as you guys probably know, but it's gotten so difficult and so expensive that it really turns the companies down a little bit, and you don't see the innovation.
Well, and I think, too, we want even students that are coming up through college and through postgraduate education to be interested in innovative products. I mean, not everybody needs to be a chairside dentist, but we could be a chairside dentist that has an interest in science.
Yes.
And how is this stifling some of the interest of some of our students in university that could be maybe pure scientists as dentists?
I think that's an excellent point. Hard to say whether it's true or not. Another one of the hats that I have the opportunity to wear, I'm involved in the National Dental PBRN, Practice-Based Research Network, and I'm the director of one of the 6 regions in Southwest region. I'm the node director. And that's kind of exciting because we have dentists in practice where we're trying to do trials with the people in private practice to try to affect change in dentistry. And that's kind of exciting. And a lot of young dentists, as you say, they get excited about that because we'll do different studies and they'll get involved. I mean, it's all sort of voluntary, but I think we have like 1,800 dentists in our region. And when we want to do a clinical trial in PBRN research, then people jump on board because they're young and they want to have an effect on the way we practice dentistry. Yeah. We all want to get better. We want to help the care for our patients.
Yeah, and the companies get data out of that. It in some ways probably decreases their costs in a good way where they can innovate more because they're able to put it out there more quickly and get data that's from multiple operators and really get more homogeneous kind of data sets. And I imagine that being a fun thing to be involved with too. Like you say, I had a little hand in developing that, right? You can kind of feel, I tested that product. It makes you feel like you're part of something bigger, and you are. And I think that we've heard this from the first interview we had with Todd Schoenbaum, who was on to talk about. One of the things we were talking about is he's trying to develop a master's degree program at his university in clinical research versus just a master's in oral biology. Yeah. Because he sees a lot of the specialists coming through and they're doing this oral biology focus, and not all of them that's really, they're passionate about that. He's like, we really want to get people into more understanding how to do and read research so that can affect them clinically and maybe get them doing more of that practice-based researching.
Well, I don't want to pop his bubble, but like I say, I've been around a long time, and the clinical research is something I've done over 25 human clinical trials, and you learn it as you sort of do it. And the problem with what I see in universities and health science centers is the administrative people start putting their hands in the pots, and so they'll have a clinical trials office at the university, and they'll have people that kind of know this stuff and regulate that. And even the other place that's really stepped up their efforts in it is the NIH, NIDCR, National Institutes of Health, and they have their own clinical trials people. So there's a lot of people trying to help out with these clinical trials. Not sure they're always helpful. I feel like when we learn it and do it ourselves, we don't need everybody sticking their hands into it. And now it's so difficult to do clinical trials because everybody's trying to regulate you in different ways. At least that's what I've seen in my time.
The value of research cannot be really, understated. It is incredibly valuable. John and I, we read the journals. And I fear that some of the journal reading, the time that you have at your desk at lunch to sit down and digest information and really try to make clinical change as we go into the practice, or at least consider looking towards, hey, I need to learn some more about that. How are we going to go forward from here? You've been in research your entire career for the most part and in education. Yes. How do we take what we've done over the last 20, 30, 40 years, which has been incredible, even with Dr. Branemark's studies and the things that he initially learned in the 80s?
Sure.
How are we going to go forward from here? How are we going to take what we're learning so that our new grads can really understand, one, how to find research, how to look for it, how to digest it, how to even apply it? It's one thing to read it, but it's the next thing to be able to apply it.
Yeah, in my answer, and I'm a periodontist, so forgive me for that or curse me for that, one of the two. But, in our residency programs, that's where the rubber meets the road. And, certainly in periodontics, we are all over the literature, all of the latest and greatest, and we want to expose our residents, the next generation of dentists coming out, to be all on top of that. You bring up an interesting point, though, is how do you get that knowledge translated into practice? And, you know, there's always been, I guess, the research shows like a 10-year lag. And I've been involved in a number of efforts where people have looked into research on how to get the information in there. I would say things like yourself, you know, you guys doing these blogs. I mean, that's fantastic. More people are going to know about tetranite now because of you all. And these meetings have always been a way to do that. I was president of this academy a number of years ago, 2012 or 13 or something. But it's the information, and the speakers bring this knowledge, and it's really a fun thing to do and be involved in. But I think interested clinicians like yourself seek out and read, and with the help of continuing education and, you know, going to these meetings, it's really how you stay current.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, our whole goal has been definitely with what we do to try to take some of these complex ideas and take the, you know, some of these pearls and try to get it out there. And I think that that's what does push us forward. And even if you are somebody that's just looking for success in your practice, even if you don't want to know everything, or you don't want to read every journal, you definitely want to have success on Monday morning. You want to see, you know, a better success rate. And that's, I think, what the research allows us to know what that looks like and how that actually works.
I heard a man once say that the trophy that we receive today, the reward we receive today, goes into a cabinet. And then after that, right, it's a new day. It's a new opportunity to explore what's next.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Don't remain stagnant. Don't just stay where we're at. Don't accept just mediocrity. And I encourage those that are listening to this to get excited about what's coming.
Yep.
I mean, it's not staying the same.
Yeah, and I think that talking through this and talking about something like tetranite, which, I mean, frankly, we are just super excited about how this might change the whole world. You know, it really could.
Yep.
And there's not many things we can say that about, you know, in the last, say, maybe 20 years of dentistry. We've had a lot of things, incremental iterations, you know. And so we're going to be following along with some of these publications and looking forward to hearing more about that. And we just... Again, once again, congratulations on your award, and thank you for joining us today on the show.
Well, I hope whatever we do, whether you're a researcher or a clinician or a combination, we all want the same thing, and that's better patient care. And if we can have a slight influence on that, then we've really done everything we could ever do.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
So
well said. Well said.
So
well, if you've listened to this today and you've been inspired, I think hopefully first of all to find out that journal article on the, you know, the tetranite and what's this all about and how's this going to change things. You're probably sharing that. You're calling your orthopedic surgeon right now, going, "Hey man, have you heard about this? You know, your hips might get a little better too. You know, we might be thinking differently about casts on kids and plates and screws. I mean, everything could change.
Everything could change.
Osteoporosis. What is going to happen with all this?" So that gets us excited, but maybe more, you know, long term, it's about what this meeting brings. It's about the people that are here, and Wes, it's about kind of what we learn.
Is your boundary where you're at right now in your practice, and you're thinking, "Man, I can't go beyond these four walls"? Stop right there. Stop living in that vacuum and go beyond your boundaries. That's what's been about this whole meeting. It's about learning to look outside of the four walls that you've created. Because if you stay in that four walls, you're going to remain stagnant. Well, bone is not stagnant. It's dynamic.
Very dynamic.
And that is what the Academy of Osseointegration is all about, is about going beyond the boundaries. I'm excited about Seattle. I've been excited about Charlotte for a year. So let's take it to the next level. And for David, for Wes, I'm Wes, right? For John, I'm Wes, and we are the Dental Guys.